Good evening and welcome. My name is Carolee. I'm the director of the Vera List Center for Art and Politics, and I am delighted to welcome you to the new school. In collaboration with the National Coalition Against Censorship, we're presenting the second of a number of programs, all dedicated to the 20th anniversary of the Decency Clause. And the whole program is called How Obscene Is This? The Decency Clause Turns 20. In 1990, 20 years ago, the American art world was transformed when Congress stipulated that, quote, general standards of decency be met by grantees of the National Endowment for the Arts. This is the condition that has become known as the Decency Clause. It has changed how our institutions work, how they function, how they're run, how they're funded, something we discussed last week, and it has deeply affected our understanding and notions of standards of decency, which is the topic that we're looking at tonight. I'm pleased to welcome our panelists, Holly Hughes, Wafa Bilal, Carolee Schneem, Trevor Paglen, and Laura Flanders, who is our moderator, and who will guide us through the thickets of what offends us now: decency, respect, and community standards. Like many other institutions, the New School was deeply entrenched in what became known as the culture wars. Prior to the Decency Clause, Senator Jesse Helms had introduced legislation to ban federal funding for, quote, obscene or indecent art. To enforce the new amendment, the NEA established a obscenity pledge, the precursor to the Decency Clause, and the New School was one of other organizations that refused to sign the pledge and eventually filed a lawsuit, New School versus Frohnmeyer. That was the name of the chairman of the NEA at the time. As I mentioned, it is not only, I mentioned it last week, and I just really have to reiterate again, it's not only an honor, but it's almost a necessity to work with the National Coalition Against Censorship on a program such as this one tonight. For almost 40 years, the coalition has influenced the debate around free speech and censorship in this country, and we were fortunate to draw from their expertise yet again. Thank you again to the panelists. I'd like to thank my colleagues at the New School, in particular Pamela Tillis, Director of Public Programs, and Annie Shaw at the Vera List Center. On behalf of the National Coalition Against Censorship, I'd also like to acknowledge the support of the Cross Currents Foundation. And I am now pleased to introduce my colleague Svetlana Mincheva, Director of Programs at the National Coalition. Thanks.
Thank you, Karen. It's been a pleasure working with the Vera List Center on these programs. And this is just the second program in a series we have on the long-term effects of the culture wars, specifically the Decency Clause, but the culture wars in general as well, and reassessing where we stand today. We are also going to have a film screening this coming Monday with a discussion. Films that are controversial for sexual reasons. And we also, when we were coming in, you saw our video project called Power, Taboo, and the Artist, an ongoing video project which invites artists and curators around the world to talk about taboo, censorship, alternative ways of arts funding. We launched this project last week, but we expect to expand it and add more videos to it. It exists online. I want to bring you back a little bit to last week's panel for those of you that were not here. It was a fantastic panel on arts funding and the culture wars, and it brought a very interesting and rather dramatic, to me, generation divide between those directly involved and somewhat battered by the culture wars, and those for whom the Decency Clause is ancient history and has no direct application today. Which, of course, does not mean that a decade of attacks on the arts and arts funding has had no long-term effects. It has indeed left its mark. And one of the telling things is, for instance, that NEA funding is not even felt to be an option for young arts organizations. the NEA, in a way, is no longer a relevant institution for artists creating original work. Yes, it supports arts education. Yes, it supports heritage projects. But if you're an artist creating work today, you better look elsewhere for funding. And of course, there's an upside to this, which is that there's a whole new generation committed to accomplishing social change through art, which is not easily censored because it is not dependent on big funding streams. How far they can reach given the absence of those big funding streams is, of course, another more complicated question. The demise of public funding is logically accompanied by a massive privatization of culture, a process which offers formidable censorship challenges, as we don't have a First Amendment in the private sphere as we do in the public sphere. So internet intermediaries, exhibition, private funders are free to censor as much as they wish. As a significant aspect of this process of privatization, even though not obviously a censorship issue, intellectual property law has extended the reach of copyright from the original 14-year term in the Copyright Act of 1790 to 95 years after publication for corporate authorship in 1998. Actually, 1998 is a very key year. This is the year that the Supreme Court upheld the Decency Clause and said it was constitutional. So as a result, artists who want to use Mickey Mouse, say, in their work will have to wait for another 13 years to do that, unless copyright is extended once more, and maybe it's 50 years. So technically, this is not censorship. De facto, it presents a serious constraint to creative expression. But of course, censorship in its familiar forms is still very much with us. The Arts Project at NCAC has been around for the last 10 years, since 2000. And we were founded after the climax of the culture wars, after 1908, after the Supreme Court decision in the Decency Clause. But while censorship has somehow left the national scene, we don't read about it so much in the national press. We have a very steady stream of local censorship incidents of the old familiar kind, where somebody takes down a work. And even worse, institutional self-censorship has gained ground and has become, in a way, business as usual. The 1990s culture wars focused on issues like sexuality, homosexuality, as well as on challenges to religious dogma. And today, shifts in popular opinion notwithstanding, those challenges go on. And, sometimes I don't know whether to shrug or to curse when somebody wants to take a nude out of the public sphere because children might see it. However, a lot has also changed. Censorship associated with religion has a whole new look. Christ has yielded the center field of controversy to Muhammad. Terrorism has entered the scene as something you should condemn and neither attempt to explain nor try to understand. And issues of Middle Eastern politics are as divisive within the museum as outside it. So we have convened this panel to testify to some of those issues, and by far, this is not a comprehensive view. And I'm sure we can get a lot of criticism. Why are you not representing this other controversial issue or that controversial issue? The full spectrum of censorship issues today is very hard to cover in one panel. So we're going to continue to address those issues next week in the film screening, as well as in our ongoing video series and in future programs. And thank you so much for coming. And I'd like to also thank the staff at NCAC, especially Marshall Rees, who designed the wonderful brochure, and our executive director, Joan Burton, sitting somewhere in the back, as well as, of course, our fantastic panel, and Laura Flanders, who has been moderating last panel and is now continuing to moderate this one, and is a wonderful spokesperson for the issues as well. And Karen will introduce Laura in more detail.
still not enough details, but just briefly a few words to Laura Flanders, who is a television host, a blogger, a journalist, a film producer, and a writer, and has been a vital progressive voice in this country. Formerly a host of Air America Radio, Laura Flanders is now the host of Grids TV, is also the founder of Grids TV, which is a daily talk show for people who want to do more than talk, a news discussion and a take action program. She's a regular contributor on MSNB and has appeared on shows ranging from Real Time with Bill Maher to The O'Reilly Factor. Flanders is the author of several books, among them the New York Times bestseller Bushwomen, Tales of a Cynical Species, that was published by Verso Books in 2004, and Blue Grit, True Democrats Take Back Politics from the Politicians, published in 2007 by Penguin Press. In October, just in time for the elections, Or Books will publish her edited volume, At the Tea Party, The Wingnuts, Whack Jobs, and Whitey Whiteness of the Republican Right, and Why We Should Take It Seriously. So, Laura Flanders, thank you.
Hi, everybody. How are you? Thanks for coming back, those of you who were here last week, and thank you so much for coming out, those of you who are daring to enter this conversation for the first time. Again, many, many appreciations to everybody who's made this panel possible, and Marshall Reese, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a real treat to be a little bit out of my typical niche and be here with, well, some of the original Bushwomen, Holly, for example. Last week, that I think I was talking about sort of the first they came for the communists theme, first they came for the artists, first they vilified the artists, and now they vilify the president. Many of the same forces. I think in today's conversation, we're going from censoring artists to censoring civic information, to censoring our planet, to censoring what we know about what our government is doing in our name. And I think our panelists here are brilliantly positioned and experienced to talk about a bunch of themes, only the very beginning of which I think is what offends us now. I wanted to just take a moment to begin by marking the loss of Jill Johnston, one of this country's most astute and insightful performance critics, dance reviewers, performers. There was an obituary in yesterday's New York Times, which I wanted to pull up, but there's no service in here, in which it was remarked, or we were reminded that in an early 60s, well, middle 60s event in New York, oh, that's my phone trying to find service. Stop. Jill Johnston appeared at an event with Norman Mailer, and part of her, wait, I'm turning this off so we won't have this strange buzzing. Okay, done. Part of her appearance, part of her performance was to quickly make out with another woman on the stage, yeah? And Norman Mailer is quoted in the Times yesterday as saying, now, act like ladies. And I think that's a perfect launch into our conversation today. I'll ask Holly, first off, to act like a lady, as she does so well and has done for so long. A longtime friend of mine, a writer and performer, 2010 Guggenheim Fellow, the recipient of funding from NISCA, NEA, the MAP Fund, Ford Foundation. More importantly, I think the recipient of the appreciation, respect, and love of enormous generations now of artists and feminists and lesbians and activists who've appreciated what you've done over the years. So it's nice you got the money and the awards, but you have our love and respect regardless. In case you don't know, and I really do encourage you to read this beautiful handout, which lays out the history, she was one of the so-called NEA 4, which is sometimes described as making her an NEA bête noire. I don't know how you feel about that. But she was one of those whose grant was approved and then withdrawn after controversy. She has a solo piece, Preaching to the Perverted, which describes that experience. Current projects include Let Them Eat Cake, a performance about the debate over marriage equality, and The Dog and Pony Show, a solo about her midlife crisis in the key of canine. That's what it says here. She's an associate professor at the University of Michigan, and I think she's just getting started. Wafa Bilal is an Iraqi-born multidisciplinary artist. He's traveled all over, partly to try to help us understand better the situation of life for Iraqis. He'll tell us about some of his works. One that's mentioned here is the 2007 installation Domestic Terrorism, which got him, which placed him at the end of a paintball gun that was accessible online to a worldwide audience. So he invited people to fire paintballs at him, and there's video of what happened. Let's just say the worldwide audience did fire those paintballs in extraordinary numbers. He's also done an extraordinary piece recently in New York that involved tattooing a map of Iraq on his back with the US casualties and the Iraqi casualties inked in different colors. And there's a video that we made for Grit TV of that work being done. It's really worth checking out. And I think we've got a link now on the site for this event. Trevor Paglen, also a Grit TV veteran, an artist, a writer, experimental geographer, a man who looked at the map and said, why are so many parts of our planet simply blacked out, meaning blackened out, no information on the map? How did that happen? How long has that been happening? And what happens in those blacked out zones? He'll tell you about that. Carolee Schneem is a multidisciplinary artist going back many years. Her video, film, painting, photography, and performance art have been shown at the Los Angeles Museum of Contemporary Art, in New York City at the New Museum, the Museum of Modern Art, the Whitney, as well as the Pompidou Center in Paris. And there is a multi-channel video installation, Precarious, which sounds fascinating, presented at the Tate Liverpool Abandoned Normal Devices Festival, September of last year. So we have great panelists, and I'd like Holly maybe to begin. I don't know whether you want to comment on the work of Jill Johnston, but I would love you to take us back to being 20 years ago caught up in a culture war that wasn't the one you thought you were waging, I don't think. But maybe I'm wrong. What happened? Take us back there.
Thanks, Laura. It's great to be on this panel with these wonderful artists, and thanks to the National Coalition Against Censorship for putting it together, and Laura and all that. I think that my work continues to be intended to be provocative, intended to be controversial. But it was the first work that I made 30 years ago when I was an infant. I don't mind being called the bête noire. That's all right it's better than Karen Finley and the Three Homosexuals, which sounds like this bad band that you had for your middle school prom. So anyways, that's better. That's an improvement. French always improves the situation, I find, especially since I don't understand it. So, but my work it really came out of a community. It came out of being part of the WOW Cafe, which still exists on East 4th Street, and part of this group of bad girls who were politically incorrect before that term had been co-opted by the first President Bush, and now you can't really use it, but wanting to challenge some of the assumptions in the left. And at that point, it was a pushback against popular feminism at the moment, which was really anti-porn, cultural feminists, and as queers and their friends and the unaffiliated, we wanted to explore sexuality and gender in a way that just wasn't acceptable. So my work was about inserting a kind of undomesticated lesbian sexuality on stage using as many things as I could borrow from gay men. I wanted phony accents, I wanted high heels, I wanted excessive makeup, I wanted, no plot, which is easy to achieve, the latter. And so, the moment of, 2 moments of controversy. My work is still about that, I think, about challenging, some of the assumptions and conventional wisdom that starts to ossify on the left. But it's different to be controversial within a certain sphere and then to be targeted by the U.S. government is a different kettle of fish. It's a terrible loss, I think, to this country that sort of goes unremarked that we don't have public funding for the arts, and we just accept that, and are willing to accept continued erosion of public services that often include instances of censorship in them. I think being part of the culture wars at that moment was, taught me a couple of ground rules about censorship. One is that it's never called censorship. This continues, never censorship. When it's always something else. It's always something else. And the person who's being, there's always some good reason for your work to not be funded. And you're always selfish. The censored artist is always selfish and in insisting that, their little lesbian skit be done and, standing in the way of world peace, We would just solve it if we didn't have to take this time out and worry about your little lesbian skit. You selfish little small-minded individual. And you are always seen as profiting from it. And one of the things that I remember that's most vivid is the kind of, not from the right wing, but from members of the downtown community, was a sense of jealousy. Well, she's not really controversial. I'm much more, she's not really a lesbian. She's, she's failed the lesbian litmus test, which I'm willing to demonstrate later on. But I think it was a different moment when the attacks were focused on individual artists doing autobiographically derived work in the midst of AIDS epidemic. And it was so distracting, that element of individualism there, that the right wing was able to shut down arts funding altogether.
Let me bring you in, Carolee, to talk about before the culture wars. There were culture wars. And there was censorship of, well, among other things, images of what happened in 1982, 1983, with the Israeli bombardment of Lebanon. You found yourself caught in that scandal, that controversy. What happened?
Well, the erotic imagery, the works with the body that were considered outrageous and constantly censored, as Holly says, the censorship is so devious and rather invisible that works simply would not be on the wall where they were supposed to be mounted. Film projectors would suddenly be taken. The projector would be arrested with the projectionist, so that wouldn't happen. And I was always astonished because my sense of what I'm doing never had to do with an intentionality to shock or disrupt, but rather to see how could I show what should be obvious, the inside that's being occluded or obscured. How do I bring that forward? And with a naive sense that everyone's going to recognize this and say, yeah, we need this. Okay, good, good, good. So I'll run through a very quickly, some of them. And then we'll get to the politics. But the politics of the body was, in 1963, an entranced series of photographs. And this one was censored and also highly valued as a link from misunderstood feminist principles to pornography. So that confused me because of the overt clitoris at a moment when you couldn't say in public that word, or vagina, or cum, or lubricity. So this image from iBody, which is one of 30 actions, has a lasting quality because watching its forbidden aspect transform. Fuses, self-shot, 1965, just a few extracts. It's a film that I had to make because I had no precedence for heterosexual pleasure. I had never seen a woman's sexuality depicted that had any connection to my own experience. So I picked up several borrowed Bolexes, and with the enthusiastic participation of my partner, began to film. So I would go from ecstasy to fury, and by 1965 I'm also working with accumulating forbidden images of Vietnam atrocities and making them into a film, Viet Flakes, and building a very elaborate installation, kinetic theater work called Snows. Given a whole theater, the Martinique, that I could build in, and with piles of water gels, because the owner was also, wanted to be identified with the anti-war movement. This is just annoying to cat lovers. You know, it's not outrageous. I shouldn't have put it in here, but it was fun. This is a troublesome work because it's a menstrual diary. It might be upside down, but we don't care. By the 70s, I was concentrating further on viscera and marks and stains and depictions of ordinary things that were forbidden in the culture, up to including her limits. This was censored simply because I was never able to show it as the installation that it had to become. And it also entered a threshold where the symbology of a naked woman in a rope and a harness culturally was defined as sadomasochistic. And I was trying again to reify, to transform the energy that was in the body as something about marking and time factoring, so that the body is, in my sense, should have been absorbed into this structure. This was a work that I could never show. They just, wherever I begged somebody, could I hang up the meaning of the actions as this installation, but it's going to be at MoMA in November. How many years is that? 70, it was made in 75. Okay.
35.
Very quickly, again, this was the troublemaker interior stroll that was considered such an outrage until feminist iconography began to relate it to Paleolithic erotic depictions, which had been my influence. It starts just as this simple little drawing. And because there was a simple little drawing at some point, I thought I had to physicalize it. Now, the political work here is what really got me in trouble because it was most suppressed. War Mop is, what year is it? Maybe 82, when the Israelis were systematically bombarding and destroying all the social structures of the Palestinians in Lebanon and in Palestinian lands. And so this was a lecture and a film and a video, and when I tried to exhibit it, I had violent reactions from a lot of the viewers. They didn't want the information. It's not subjective. It's not something I made up. This was just pure research. We'll skip the kitties. It's another obscenity, but we'll save that for another time. I just want to end with the recent disruptive work, which was an homage to get as close as possible through the photographs and enlargements of a group of the bodies that had been exploded out of or chose to leap instead of being incinerated from the World Trade Center. And this is a series of prints. It's about the size of this projection. When it was first shown, the reaction again was often very violent because it disturbed the Americana sense of invulnerability, I think, and our righteousness, and especially a female artist had no right to depict this that it was somehow going to be to my advantage to depict tragic imagery. So I had to write a statement saying it was an in memoriam, and it was to honor this group. Okay, well, we already did that, so.
Thank you.
Make it go away. Okay.
She's censoring the computer now.
So I just want to say that the issues of the erotic and sexuality have been completely commodified, trivialized, run away with. It's very hard to find anything, what's our theme here? Offensive. I have to wait till I'm really outraged. There's really nothing offensive as such, and I wanted to tell you all that Lady Gaga has put my work back into popular culture with her meat outfit. A lot of people are researching that. And not only that, I hope you all know that she appeared today to fight for lesbian culture. Do you know about this, Holly?
No.
Lady Gaga came out as gay today in Portland, Maine. Go Lady Gaga. Speaking at a rally to repel, don't ask, don't tell.
Go Gaga.
Go Gaga.
Trevor, to you, what's a nice experimental geographer doing on this panel, and what is an experimental geographer?
It's a long talk, but it's a very different talk than what I was going to talk about today. I guess the reason that I'm here, I mean, I've been involved in things that are what I think are outrageous, but maybe in a more contemporary sense. I've spent about, I don't know, the last 9-10 years studying state secrecy, studying everything from CIA covert operations to different secret military infrastructures and so on and so forth. And over the course of doing that work, I work as both an artist and as a writer, and I have an MFA in fine art, but also have a PhD in geography. And I guess what brings me to the conversation today is I've published a number of works and done a number of artworks that were controversial, perhaps in a rather different sense. Not controversial in the sense that I'm being, trying to create a controversy or deliberately trying to put something in somebody's face that's going to be disturbing, as much as it is about, documenting torture that's been perpetrated by the United States against other people, disappearances of terror suspects, for example, trying to find, research and investigate the locations of a network of secret prisons that the CIA was running, kind of on and on, a number of different projects investigating various parts of what we might call the secret state. And I guess that's been controversial in the sense that I guess a lot of people have been upset by that, but perhaps in a little bit of a different way. With regards to this question of experimental geography, that really is a different question. That really is a lecture in and of itself, but it basically has to do with, it's basically a style of geography that I wanted to do, and I saw some friends of mine doing. An experimental geography was just a word to kind of describe a series of practices, a series of scholarly practices or investigative practices in which form and content are indistinguishable from one another. So it really is looking at the forms of scholarship, the forms of research, and trying to politicize that as well as the content of what one does. And that's the very, very small, short version of what that is.
Wafa, to you, you manage somehow in your work to offend a lot of people. How?
Well, I hope I don't offend anybody today here. I think to begin with, I must say I am a product of two words, and I divide them into a conflict zone and a comfort zone. Because of these physical distance, there is a disengagement. And since I live in the comfort zone and I am connected to the conflict one, I'm trying to engage my audience in the comfort zone. So I draw strategies of engagement, and these strategies, such as aesthetic pleasure versus aesthetic pain, the virtual platform versus physical platform, the body has its own language, and the objective of these strategies is to engage my audience in a political dialogue, and sometimes a lot of them are unwilling to engage. Part of these strategies is to agitate artists as an agitator. And I don't think when we cry censorship, we are 100% not guilty. You know, I think there is a hint. We kind of anticipate there perhaps it is going to be a controversy or a censorship. So drawing up on that notion, then the ideas become the anticipation of it and the planning of such an encounter. And a lot of it is basically the artist as an initiator of a platform. And these become dynamic encounters. So, but you have to know the culture and how to get under its skin and push its buttons. I could go on, but I wanted to mention a couple of the projects that were censored from 2007 to now. I have about 4 completely shut down shows, but I'll just offer a couple or maybe 3 of them. First one was called the Iraqi House Project. It was in Montalvo Art Center in Saratoga. When I was invited to engage the community it's a gated community, very rich community, in issue about Iraq. And I proposed to build an Iraqi farmhouse on this mansion, which is where the center is held. And bring the community to build that house literally one brick by one, by making the adobe and building it. But what the community did not know, when they finished the house, I would blow it up. That really didn't go very well. And I really didn't understand it. And I said, what kind of a country when they don't allow you to blow up your own house? Right? In Iraq, I could blow a couple or more. So, then we went on into same issues as Trevor was investigating, is the issue of torture and waterboarding. And at the time of that's 2007, it was very hot debate, and a lot of people didn't understand even what waterboarding and what the CIA doing. So I wanted to create another platform, this time is a virtual one, by launching a website called Dog or Iraqi. Who would you waterboard? You have to vote for a month, and then who's valuable more, the dog or the Iraqi? And we have very cute pictures of me and a pug. Man, PETA did not like that. They really, really hate it, and they managed to shut it down. But then I called them and I said, did you hear about this project? And they said, of course we heard. And I said, I bet you are mad. And they said, yeah. And I said, about the dog, right? They said, yes. And I said, is there a PETA for Iraqi or something like that? They didn't respond. Actually, they hang up. So there's no PETA for Iraqi. And one last...
We noticed.
One last project I want to mention, which got a lot of attention, is a game called The Night of Bush Capturing Virtual Jihadi. The first time I heard about a video game called The Night of Bush Capturing put by Al-Qaeda in 2005, I really thought Al-Qaeda got into the business of porno. The Bush capturing. I was very happy about the game, just like The Night of Bush Capturing. But then it turned out to be capturing President Bush, which was really disappointed. But anyway, so what I wanted to do with the game is to raise awareness about how Iraqis live in their daily basis and why there are a lot of them becoming suicide bombers. And at the same time, I wanted to be that invisible mirror to reflect society on its own. And what I did, I got the game, I inserted myself as the expandable Iraqi suicide bomber who is going to blow up himself next to President Bush. The government didn't like that either. You know, so RPI, Rensselaer Biotechnical Institute, it did not like the game as well, and we managed to open it only for 2 hours before it was shut down. Then 2 days later, we opened it again in Troy, and at that time, the city of Troy shut it down again.
Just to clarify, that game was originally created by the U.S. government?
No, the game was originally created by a guy called Jesse Petrella in 2003 around the invasion of Iraq. But what Al-Qaeda did, which that's what I thought it was smart, is went into the game and changed the skin of Iraqi soldiers to a skin of American soldiers, the skin of Saddam to a skin of Bush, and that outraged us in our own comfort zone because we are not used to see ourselves as the hunted, always as the hunted.
So as long as it was a game targeting Saddam?
It's fine.
But turn it around and you're in trouble. So do you feel those works, I mean, you must, I would imagine, feel those works were successful if your goal was to agitate and engage. You did exactly that?
Well, this is the point when I don't think we have to question the objective of each artist in the role of an agitator, because I think agitation and censorship, or looking for censorship for the sake of it, it's not as honorable as the objective of the artist to engage the public in a sort of political dialogue and bringing or building this platform in order to kind of avoid to being a single distribution channel imposing our own ideas as artists on the public, rather than opening the conversation by triggering something and then stepping back a little bit and let the public debate that issue. Because I think that's one of the most important things, is how do you engage in an age of image overexposure.
Don't forget, there's going to be questions later, so if you're formulating some in your mind, note them down and prepare to ask them. Holly, just to get it out of the way, there were a lot of people who thought the censorship, your experience as one of the NEA4, was good for your career. And in light of the comments last week about more hits is more hits, what do you think about the controversy that came with your experience?
I want to answer that question, but I also want to just tag on to Wafa's description of his work and say that, you know, as awful as the Tea Party is in this country, I think PETA is worse. PETA is really a force for evil, but this is not what this panel is about. But so there's no reasoning with them. And I have experience of being shut down by PETA as well. But anyways, So there were no hits back in 1990 because we didn't have the interwebs at that point, or only Al Gore had them or something, or I didn't have them at least. Maybe everyone else had them. I wasn't on them. But I think it's again, I'm thinking about what happened last week as you recounted it. You were talking about organizations as opposed to being an individual artist who's a performer performing work about their own life, as was the case of the other performance artists. So you get, and you're a character in someone else's narrative. I mean, that's, you know, in a narrative that's being framed by the right wing, by Jesse Helms, a lot of people who are, I don't think are really dead yet, or, you know, others have sprung, just as awful, have sprung up in their stead. And the response on the left was, you know, like, oh, you know, this censorship thing, you know, we love the First Amendment, it's like baseball in this country, and apple pie and kids finger painting, that's what the NEA does, and Shakespeare and all that, you know, and basket weaving, and, you know, we're standing out there with our pants literally down, or figuratively down, and getting death threats. And, you know, some of my favorite death threats being, you know, getting this card delivered to my house saying, I know where you live, I have a gun, I'm coming to New York this summer, P.S. Jesus loves you. Another one that was just said, hey, cunt, H-A-Y-K-U-N-T. Again, I think that the fact that it was individual artists whose work raised questions and among the left made it difficult to mobilize effectively. And any time that, you know, I was called to, you know, be in a panel or some sort of demonstration or talk about it, it seemed as though you're just defending your own work as opposed to talking about something larger.
There's a story from Michael Moore about what happened after he gave his anti-war speech accepting an Academy Award for Fahrenheit 9/11. Mm-hmm. He received death threats. His mother received death threats. He had to, I think, hire guards to protect his home in Flint, Michigan. That was when it was supposed to be okay to be Michael Moore speaking out, but even Michael Moore wasn't protected. Before we get to the politics, Carolee, do you think on the questions of sexuality and the body and nakedness that the idea of obscenity, of decency, has changed? I mean, it's changed, but is there still a way in which a naked body is controversial, is obscene?
Well, it's always political for me, and censorship has to do, in my sense of it, with phobias, unconscious phobias, need to control the body, and traditionally, particularly to control the female body. One of the things that is very political for me now is the deformation of the female body as an entertainment by having hugely enhanced breasts that look like balloons. And I equate this with male violence in the sense that it's to displace envy of birth and castration fears. If she has such huge inflatable boobs, then maybe she's not a mutilated version of what a male needs to believe is the norm, the hierarchical embodiment. So there's no aspect of physicality that I don't see as politically engaged, compromised, connected.
But we have almost entirely naked young women, and some men too,
Yeah.
malnourished, they always seem to me.
Yes, but it's all part
in
of
advertising.
you know, it's a kind of corrupted sense of attribution. The way works are now being redone, remade. It's a kind of sinister devaluation of the deeper struggles and considerations and resistances that physicalized work would have been motivated by previously. It's become, and it happened very quickly, it became a kind of titillation of sexuality, and now that it's relatively decorative and meaningless and used to obscure the social issues and the context that really puts the contradictions of physicality. It doesn't put them in frame, it diverts them. It's all occluded now because it's fun. And no, the feminist struggles are debased by the media and by all the seductive ways that we don't have to struggle, we don't have to fight for issues anymore. And it's inculcated in the media. I think it's quite predetermined and has, any magazine you look at that's a popular magazine is about sexuality and how you have to get married. No, don't get married, just get pregnant. The bump. A lot of bumping.
Can I just say
go ahead.
something that I think, you know, responding to that as somebody who teaches performance in the Midwest, I mean, the live body naked is still really has its power to disturb when it's mediated in film, you know. I mean, what could happen in a play or a student production it could be so much more mild than what they would see on TV or in a magazine. But it's the liveness, it's the realness of it. There's not a distancing, and I think that's, I mean, of course, you know, probably less sensitivity in New York, but I still think even here, and maybe new media has made the live human body even more disturbing.
Is there anything comforting or reassuring, Wafa, about the fact that dead bodies, too, are deemed too disturbing for us to see? Whether it's dead coffins of dead U.S. service people returning, or actual images from what is happening in this war in Iraq or the war in Afghanistan, our longest ever war, longer than Vietnam, and how many, we've seen a smidgen of the pictures that we ever saw in that war.
Yeah, I think there are two things I wanted to comment on. One is your question, just like why the image is so altered, the image we receive, and I think that's part of a long strategies of disengagement, because as you mentioned, the body has its own language and it reacts animalistically, naturally to another body that is in front of it. And I think in a culture when we try to deliberately disengage, so we are of course going to censor anybody, whether it is a naked body or a mutilated body as well, because it doesn't outrage us, but it engages us in a dialogue that is the establishment perhaps does not want us to be part of.
Do you think if those final images from Abu Ghraib that apparently the networks have had for a very long time but haven't released, were released today, they would be as outraging as the first batch of images were years back?
No, I think it just, you know, if we are talking about histories and how it is these images, the immediacy of the image, and I think thanks to the technology and internet, we were able to see these images as things occur, and I think that has a profound effect rather than seeing something from the past, because then we are already distanced from it emotionally, And there is a time between, so the engagement is not necessarily the same. But what happened with technology, and what I always refer to as a technology made man the Trojan horse. So basically, my mic was cut. Is there any censorship? Hey.
No, it's all right. We can hear you.
No, I think it's fine now. Yeah, so when technology made man is a Trojan horse, there is no walls to the empire. This way we could infiltrate any system. And I think what happened with images, Abu Ghraib, they were released on time by soldier, and perhaps they did not know the significance of these images. The Pentagon had them for a very long time. Then the news outlet had them very time, and only the Pentagon released, because I think it was a network who's saying, okay, we can't hold this story anymore, and we're going to release it. Then the Pentagon said, well, we have to release it too.
Mm. Coming to you, Trevor, I remember when we talked on the TV, we had you on the show, I think, with a lawyer from the Center for Constitutional Rights who said, you know, the only way we were actually able to prosecute some of these forced relocations, the renditions that the U.S. has done of people captured here and taken there for torture, was thanks to your ostensibly artwork, that your work using GPS devices and so on had actually enabled prosecutions to happen. That's an engagement that we haven't thought of.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree with Wafa that I think that if those other Abu Ghraib images were to come out, they would be just as shocking, and we would be just as horrified by them. There's a newspaper in Australia that has actually published some of them. You can look for them and see some of them. I mean, not all of them have been out. But every time you look at those images, they're still shocking, and they're deeply disturbing. And they are real to a certain extent. But I'm not actually interested in the kind of politics of overt controversy or controversy over images at the moment. I feel like so much of our political culture is defined by being offended or by doing something offensive, by burning a Quran or this or that. And it seems to me that that represents the kind of extreme aestheticization of politics. And I think that that is in general not really where we want to be going in terms of having a national conversation about some very, very serious issues. And so I think in my own work, I try to do things that are provocative, but not for the sake of being provocative, in the sense that, you know, for example, I've actually tracked down and traveled to a number of these secret CIA prisons and just photographed them outside. And then what I show is a very banal looking image of a building, and then the title would say, you know, this is this and that secret prison outside of Kabul or where have you. But there's really nothing at all inherently controversial in the image, and to me it's just a different kind of strategy that I try to use. But you're absolutely right. What was a big part of trying to bring these programs into the public eye, or try to adjudicate really a lot of the, you know, straight up crimes against humanity that were perpetrated by our government, one of the real tricks was to try to develop a language or a vocabulary with which to speak about these programs. So for example, there was a number of people who had been in these black sites, as they were called, had been tortured, had gotten out, and told their stories. That, you know, I was kidnapped in Macedonia. I disappeared for 4 months. I was held somewhere in Afghanistan, I think, where I was being tortured. They finally threw me out on the side of a road in Albania, and I just made it home. And these guys would show up, and they would sound like a UFO person who said that they'd been like abducted by UFOs or something like that. I mean, they really, these stories just sounded crazy. And so a big part of the project was to develop a vocabulary with which you could have a kind of reasonable discussion about them. And so a part of what I feel like, there was a lot of people who are contributing to that project, but in Ben's work with the ACLU and also for the Center for Constitutional Rights in the Majid Khan case, they were basically at the end of when they filed the lawsuits, they would include basically an appendix of stories and images that the idea is that using this appendix, this was like a dictionary, and this would give you the language with which to speak about these. And some of my images were included in those.
It's very much about putting things on the map, which is, I guess, the way that I would connect the censorship of Holly and Carolee's work with the censorship that you're grappling with in your work. I'd love to, Carolee, whether you want to talk a little bit about the connections as you see them between the different kinds of work that you've done and the reaction to it. Is there the same instinct to be outraged by?
Images that have been forbidden or suppressed, that they remain and transform our consciousness of what the reality might be. You know, seeing the immense destruction when you finally see it of Iraq, of Palestinian, of Gaza, that the images are what bring our feelings towards some focus. Otherwise, it's just more propaganda floating around. The fact that we don't have an activist community or a sense of purposeful direction has to do with larger complex issues, which for me relate over and over again to living in an assassination culture. And that's part of our unconscious terror and uncertainty because it's never been brought forward. So what we have done within our own political structure in terms of murdering most of our leaders gets transposed into a foreign enemy. So the same actions, the same militaristic technological forces are organized outward, away from us. And the only way that I feel that we have some sense of connectivity is when the imagery that we're forbidden to see somehow comes back.
Mm. Anybody want to respond to that or add? Mm. I mean, one of the places I wanted to go next. Go ahead, Holly.
I was going to pick up on what Carolee said about the absence of an activist community, and I feel that. I mean, I feel I feel in this moment as a progressive, and what's the forum beyond my individual artwork and beyond learning about other people's work and the work that they're doing, but where is the next step to take that outrage, to respond to any of the work that people are presenting here and translate it into political action? And something that I feel acutely in this moment where, we have a democratically controlled Congress, at least for the moment, and a president about whom we were very hopeful and are very aware of the unfairness of the attacks, and yet it really feels inadequate. I mean, it doesn't feel like electoral politics are the forum, but there's sort of doesn't feel like there's activist individuals.
It seems to me that there might be a connection. I don't know how many of you are familiar, but right across town right now at White Columns Gallery over on 13th Street, there's an installation connected to the 20-year oral history of ACT UP. And in that small exhibition, and there's a much larger online archive of interviews with people who were part of ACT UP, the coalition to unleash action around HIV and AIDS. There is so much evidence of the role of artists put into action. And I was struck, the posters, I don't know how many of you are familiar, but the posters, the imagery, the flyers, the messages, it was artist-driven, much of it, and it was immediately art put into action. And I was thinking about it again this evening as I looked at this Jill Johnston obituary and the online version where the Citibank ad was two people kissing who looked almost exactly like one of the ACT UP posters from years ago. So is it just a coincidence that we've got two 20th anniversaries going on? When we think about the effectiveness of art and the effectiveness of the censorship, was it more effective than we like to believe? Go, Carolee.
Yes, I just think it definitely was effective. I mean, the transformations in the past 20 years are astonishing, given the slow suppressiveness of most history, of cultural history. So, I mentioned Lady Gaga going to court in Portland today, not in a costume. That comes out of ACT UP, it comes out of feminist activations, it's come out of Jill Johnston's life, and the whole context and activism around the avant-garde, and Jill being a centralizing figure in that. Yeah, the differences are enormous, just that we could be here with this kind of discussion, but the resistances are they're so huge, and the fragmentation is also huge. So it's confusing.
Holly, Warfa? I mean, when you shut down artists, are you also shutting down the kind of lifeblood of a lot of action?
Well, I think this is one thing keep happening over and over. Is just shutting down a show. They know it's going to get bigger and better, right? Because then you're engaging the public. And I think it does really matter for an artist to push buttons, you know. I mean, we're people who are willing to be humiliated. Not for the sake of humiliation, but it's for the sake of engagement. And I think it is very important just to keep pushing the boundaries, speaking up of issues that you are really connected to. Otherwise, I think the act these days is not how big the group is really how determined the individual is in speaking up. And overall, we have a fantastic, never existed before, a virtual platform when you could literally enter anybody's home and office and engage them. So I think it is very important in the past and the present, and it's going to keep going.
I'd like to open it up to questions while maybe people are thinking of other thoughts. If you have questions you want to share, there is a mic here and a mic there. Come on up. Lots of hands, good. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I just have a response, and I think that Carolee spoke to it, talking about the fracturing, because there are a lot of people who are engaged politically, doing actions. Excuse me?
Just come a little closer to the mic.
Oh, you can't hear me?
There we go.
Oh, anyway, responding to what Carolee said about the fractiousness within the sort of avant-garde culture movement. You know, there are people who are political, who are doing political actions, who come out of artistic traditions. I know right now there's fundraising for a boat, a U.S. boat, to help break the blockade against Gaza, and it's actually artists. It comes out of the tradition of an artist group, but you said being fractured. That people there isn't a connecting overall umbrella so that everybody knows what people are doing. And I found that, for instance, during the invasion of Iraq, when there was a lot of visible activism and artists coming together with activists, that there was a lot of competition among smaller groups, which ended up, unfortunately, creating a type of factious sort of disassembling of what was ultimately, I think, a lot of energy with a lot of things happening. So it's just sort of the lack of organization.
Can I ask her a question? To what extent might there be government infiltration in the activist groups, disrupting and losing papers and such? Right. That's how it was in the early days. I wonder if it's still like that.
Well, I mean, even the photographer for I Am a Man ends up being, working for the FBI. I mean, that's, what are you going to do?
Well, we know from New York, the Republican National Convention experience, we learned that our own Metropolitan Police our own NYPD was infiltrated by was infiltrating activist groups and provoking things. And that was an interesting study in documentation and evidence also, because it was the capturing of the actions by the folks at Eyewitness Video that actually were brought into court. the images of what the police had done were what eventually got all the charges dropped against the protesters. And it was many of them video artists who documented what had happened. So that wasn't so long ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to pick up on something that Trevor said about the aestheticization of politics, because it seems to me that there's been a kind of strange migration of tactics from the artists of the 90s to the kind of the right wing of today, in the sense that people like Glenn Beck or Sarah Palin, they're kind of these sort of outrageous performers. They make, these kind of outrageous, racist, homophobic, Islamophobic statements, and they are, under the cover of the First Amendment. And I'm just wondering if perhaps they've learned too well from us, or what do we make of that they seem to be using this same kind of tactic that we used in the 90s.
They're certainly provocateurs.
It was a funny story. Jacques from the Yes Men told me once that you remember that kid who was going around and he set up Acorn, and apparently that kid came to a Yes Men lecture and then kind of came up to Andy afterwards and said, I learned everything that I got from you guys, and was like really trying to start a fight with him, and they were just like, get out of here. But yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, the tactics are not, that the politic is not necessarily in the form that it takes. You know what I mean?
I mean, the futurists were fascists. There's a not an automatic assumption of a certain kind of politics in the avant-garde, and they are tactics that can be used by anyone. I think we have to come up with other tactics.
Or not, or just attach them to strategies that are doing something else, you know what I mean?
Did you have a question?
Yeah. It seems like possibly one of the things that might be a theme tonight is that the kind of right-wing ire has shifted from sort of the abstract to the concrete. I mean, I don't necessarily think that right-wing politics are interested in targeting the arts anymore, or if so, it's happened at such a local level that it kind of flies under the radar. And I wonder if... Right, and I wonder, for one thing, what the panelists might think about this, because instead of coming from a place like Newt Gingrich's Congress in 1994, where really their power is kind of nominal, and the best thing to do is throw a fit about a plastic Christ in urine, for example. In the early aughts, when I was an art student, we've got the complete makeover of state constitutions, of the potential threats to the, just for example, an amendment banning gay marriage and stuff like that. And I wonder how well prepared artists are to combat this, given the sense that at least when I was being educated, there's still very much this sense that if you are engaged in the arts, that to be political is to dilute yourself, to debase yourself in a way, and mess with something that is kind of sacred. And I guess just how well prepared we are to combat these people.
Are we better or less well prepared?
Well, I teach in an art school, and I think that most of my colleagues, there's a few of my most of them are probably at least Democrats, but I think, I think that there is also evidence of what you're speaking, that politics, politics and art shouldn't mix. That's not the case across the board, but the political, especially engagement in something that's, it's one thing if there's a certain kind of, if you're taking a political stance on something that's safely in the past. If it's in relationship to an archive, that's something, but something that is alive, I think not so much. And there's, I think, among the students, the economic anxiety about what they're going to do afterwards completely overwhelms. You know, politics seem like another kind of indulgence that they can't really afford.
Go ahead, Wafa.
Yeah, I guess there are a couple things. One is just like there is no such a thing as non-political art. You know, even the decision that's not making political art is a political decision. But I think we have to differentiate between one is an individual that exists in an institution and their stand on controversial work. But then I think our biggest fear is the institution itself. And I think we had a discussion earlier about the privatization of these institutions. For example, when I was at RPI and the show was shut down by the president of the school, there is no amendment, right? Because it was considered as a private institution. They could do whatever they wanted to do in that case.
And yet, and Holly, I wanted you to just clarify what happened in the early 90s with the changes in funding at the NEA. It wasn't that all public art was no longer funded. It wasn't that there was no public funding for art, but there was no public funding specifically for individual.
For living individual artists to make work. You know,
those individual grants from the NEA no longer existed.
They went away. And, you know, this followed, you know, it came after years of erosion of other sources of public funding. And going back to the 70s, you know, I've been working on a book about the Wow Cafe that was the place where I kind of launched my work. And, you know, looking at arts organizations that preceded it, you know, the whole sort of existence of something like the CETA Fund, where there were community-based arts and social service organizations where you could have a modest, put in place by Nixon of all people, that you could have a modest salary and have a community-based arts organization, and it all sort of like started disappearing really under Reagan. But the lack of funding, the erosion of public funding for individual artists.
And why was it so important to go after the individual, or to cut that particular, close that particular tap off, do you think?
Well, one, an individual is less well prepared to defend themselves. I mean, it certainly took a toll on the Brooklyn Museum to have continued assaults by, you know, Rudolph Giuliani. But to an individual, because then the issue becomes like, is Robert Mapplethorpe a good artist? Is Karen Finley really an artist? Or, you know, what do you think about Holly Hughes? What do you think about Annie Sprinkle? What do you think about this artist or that artist? It devolves into that issue. And, you know, and as opposed to, I remember when our Witnesses Against Our Vanishing at Artist Space was shut down, a show about AIDS, a group show at a, you know, small downtown arts organization, and the community turned out, you know, the community that I knew of, the downtown arts community, this is awful. Everybody felt a connection and outrage about the AIDS crisis, and it was a group show. It was an institution, a small institution. It was not the same thing. It was to go after individual artists. I think that really, whose work was, you know, raised issues, and you got bogged down into a cult of celebrity that obscured what was larger at play. And, you know, for the individuals, it made, I think, all of them crazy.
I have a question.
Carolee.
I have a question because the intensity of the political community in the 60s and 70s was racially mixed, and I see that somehow this is all a white discussion. It's quite extreme. Where is everybody else? You know?
He's colored.
You're sure?
Well,
okay.
They're not on the mailing list.
anybody want to talk to them? Let me pick up on something, because maybe you guys can help connect some things. When I heard you talking, Holly, and Carolee, actually, what you just raised isn't unconnected. The period that we're talking about is a period of privatization. We privatized you know, welfare. If you are poor, that's your fault. It's not a society problem. We now have, I think the last number was 44 million people in this country living in poverty as defined by LBJ. 10,000 plus for an individual a year is the poverty rate. 44 million. 1 in 7 of us. Isn't that obscene? And what about the language of obscenity around those kinds of realities that we all experience in one way or another all the time? Does it have to be a war with blood? I mean, what is obscene today? That would be my answer,
This is one of the things that I was really interested in getting at in terms of thinking about the aestheticization of politics and trying to get away from thinking about politics as fighting over images or fighting over slogans, something like that. Like 1 in 7 Americans is in poverty, as you know, exactly defined by LBJ. Like not many, many more in real poverty. You know, that is absolutely outrageous. You know, the fact that the Obama administration has continued to disappear people and has now has American citizens on assassination lists. These things are very, very outrageous, but they are not connected to the image of somebody doing this or that kind of thing. And so, to me, that is, I'm much less interested in what makes us outraged now so much as why is it that we are not outraged by so many things, I guess.
Can you say more about the assassination list?
Oh yeah, sure.
I don't think we know much about that.
Yeah, I mean the Obama administration has all but admitted that they have been running an assassination program. I mean, of course, the Jerome program is an assassination program, but they have an assassination program going on in North Africa and the Middle East, and they've all but admitted that a man named Anwar al-Awlaki is on that list targeted for assassination. He's an American citizen, and right now I think it's the CCR who are trying to get the ability to represent him in court to try to get him off of this list, and they have to represent themselves to the Department of Treasury. Somehow it's a very, very strange, mixed up thing. But this is something that, if the Bush guys had done this would have provoked an outrage by a lot of people perhaps in this room, because there was a clear sense of that the world should not be this way. And I think that perhaps with the Obama administration, that myth has changed. And I think that's what enables the Obama administration to really continue some of the most brutal practices of the Bush administration and reinvigorate them, make them even stronger, and expand them. And yet that it's somehow less visible now, I suppose. And to me, that's a very curious question right now, and something I've been thinking a lot about.
Can we close by talking a bit about what might turn some of this around? Whether we need to offend more or be more outraged. Howard Zinn always said it's not the civil disobedience that's the problem, it's the civil obedience. What can people do if they don't want to be having a panel like this 20 years from now and saying, ooh.
Well, that's in some ways a question for the audience to somewhat respond to. I mean, I would suspect that people in this audience are probably outraged and about the obscene poverty rate in this country, and yet feel probably, as I do, perplexed about how to channel and shape that outrage, much as I feel outraged about the continuing unwinnable, stupid, ill-thought-out wars. And yet you're running up against I think returning to where is the mechanism for activism? What response is being triggered by the work that's being made? How does it translate into some sort of action?
Martha? I mean, in a way, you're saying we have the means at our disposal.
Yeah, I think we do. I mean, it's a matter, as I said before, the objective here is it's not to draw controversy, but the objective is to engage. And I think it is going to continue that way. You know, there is always, since we are living far away from any conflict zone and where our government here waging a war far away, there are so many people who will be engaged. So there is no need to say, no, engage, and we would stop make art. This is kind of just like it's a threat. I don't think it's going to happen. And what's going to happen is just like always, there will be 1, 2, 3 people, 4 maybe, willing to push these buttons, or rather not. I mean, Trevor doing great work, but he doesn't want to wanted to push button and be controversial, but he raised a great deal of information or engagement in his own work. And I think it's going to be up to the people who wants to engage others, what kind of strategies of tactic they use to engage others.
So we have one more question.
Hi, and thank you very much for the panel and everything. So I was thinking about like looking at these different strategies, like a group of artists after censorship. Maybe the apex of it we can see in Felix Gonzalez-Torres trying to use abstraction as a strategy in order to basically elude from those situations of censorship. But then it falls into a trap of minimizing the abilities to communicate with the audience. And well, what I was thinking is that I don't want to really go to a long story about it, but just, you know, picking up from Deleuze, what we need to think about is a new form of a weapon. And how much do you think this new form of weapon, rather than, you know, fearing or hoping, this new form of weapon against censorship should be persisting on doing what we do without any form of abstraction, or should it be completely changed and we should think of different ways of communicating the political message or the political engagement that we are waiting for?
You're talking about a Deleuzian new form of weapon? Is that what you said? I didn't understand what you mean by that.
Okay, I just didn't want to go. I thought I just will. Well, in the society of control, when Deleuze is talking about it's not time for us to now fear or hope for something to come, but we just need to look for a new form of weapon to stop the control of this, you know, basically the strategies and systems of controlling the society. So I'm thinking. What's an
example of that?
Well, I was just looking at, for me, for example, like the way that Hassan Elahi used the camouflage is a way of camouflage is a new strategy that we see in contemporary art that he's using to basically use that new form of a weapon. So I was thinking, do you think we should really look to a new form of a weapon, and how much this, you know, perplexing situation, being entrapped between non-communication or very minimal communication in a form of abstraction, or being very, you know, blatant and making yourself vulnerable to different forms of censorship. How can we negotiate this?
I mean, I mean, I'll just answer for myself. I think this is something probably everybody has an answer to. But I mean, in the first instance, of course, you always want to be developing new ways of talking to people, new ways of engaging the world, new ways of trying to understand and engage with politics. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't fetishize that which is new, though. I mean, because it was kind of in and of itself reproducing kind of a capitalist logic. I mean, we can look at what works, what doesn't work. Abstraction can work in certain kinds of cases. There's certain work that it can do, there's other kinds of work that it can't do. But I think beyond that, perhaps it's useful to get outside of this paradigm of communication entirely. How about punching people, or building things, or, I mean, thinking about materiality rather than semiotics. For me, that's been a very helpful way to think.
I want to know who you've punched, but anyway, go ahead.
Well, back in the 90s, I remember when many of us got together and formed a group called WAC. And I think some of us remember the passion, maybe some of these people in the room. Is anybody there?
The Women's Action Coalition?
Yes. Remember the passion that we had back then? It sort of fizzled out after a few years, and it's a real shame. But I think we artists went to the internet to voice ourselves, and the internet is a beautiful tool to get all your political stuff. There's rarely any censorship, but there is. And unfortunately, I've learned this myself, because making political art doesn't pay the bills. You spend an awful lot of time on it, but it just doesn't pay the bills. So you sort of back off and say, oh my God, my rent's due, and health insurance and all of that stuff. So as much as we all want to voice ourselves, I wish we had the passion again. I wish we had would group together and just get our mojo going, but it's somewhere fizzled out. So.
Can I add a question to your question, and you see whether you approve? I thought where you might be going with your question was, with the advent of the internet, we have more individual autonomy, and we talked about that last week, but what's happened to community? And the actual corporeal getting together, live bodies in the room with other live bodies. The title of this panel is Decency, Respect, and Community Standards, What Offends Us Now? And I've been thinking about, well, for standards, you have to have a sense of community. And I will, be, in closing, and I'd love each of you to comment, appreciate the bringing together of people in the room to discuss these topics. Maybe we've made a little step towards creating a bit of community. But I think that passion was not each of our individuals' passions. It was that you had 400 pissed off women in the room, and that's good for passion.
And all the male, remember the baking sale where all the guys made the cookies?
That's right, yes. Well, we had our gender roles very clear.
Thank you.
Thank you. Closing thoughts.
You guys are wiser than me, so don't look at me. You're much wiser.
You want to answer the question, what offends us now?
What's the question?
Well, the question of the title is, what offends us now? And then the other question might be, whose decency?
And what's the second question?
Whose decency? Whose decency are the censors working on behalf of?
There's so much.
Maybe they're provoking you all to fill in the gaps. It's an artistic strategy here.
I feel, anger is what gets me up in the morning. I used to think it was caffeine, but really, there's no shortage of outrage. And I suspect that that's shared by people in the room and I return to there, and there's even media, to ways to express your outrage. What feels missing to me is beyond the expression, the provocation, or making visible what's not seen, what is the next step. And that feels, I'm very acutely aware of it, as I said, in this political moment. So it's a question. Open to answers.
I guess
Trevor?
Perhaps for me, in terms of, in this conversation, one of the things I really detect is that perhaps what's missing now is the fact that we've completely lost faith in the state. We don't think of the state really as a civic institution anymore. And that's what the whole point of having a government is. And perhaps that is a kind of fundamental thing that's very, very troubling. As you pointed out, this, of course, maps directly onto the rise of neoliberalism and this sort of thing. But in California, for example, which is where I have a lot of connections, I'm very much a part of the UC system, and we're seeing, the UC system you can think of as one of the last examples of a great kind of state civic institution that worked relatively well and was quite admirable. And now it's, being completely flushed down the toilet. But I also take issue with the fact that there are not people organizing and there isn't energy in fighting against this. There's tremendous energy in trying to resist a lot of these things. And so I don't want to, I'm very suspicious of when people say, oh, it used to be like this or that. Well, those stories are being created every day and people are continuing to do that work.
Anyone else? Well, I will say that everybody's work is represented at the website. You have links to people's work at the website for the Coalition Against Censorship. And there's, don't forget to pick this up. And I think that was a great closing reminder that from a conversation about state funding of the arts, we've gotten to a question about state funding of the state. A lot more panels to be had. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming.